The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of River Street Coffee as Mike Chen pushed open the heavy glass door. The familiar bell chime announced his arrival, mixing with the whirring of coffee grinders and the gentle hum of early morning conversations. He breathed in deeply, letting the rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans fill his lungs. This was his favorite part of the day, these quiet moments before diving into the bustling world of corporate law. Mike adjusted his navy blue suit jacket, a birthday gift from his mom that had cost her 3 months of savings. She'd insisted on buying it when he made junior partner at Thompson & Associates, telling him with tears in her eyes how proud she was of her son. The memory still made him smile. At 32, he'd accomplished more than his parents could have imagined when they moved to the city with nothing but hope and determination. The line at the counter moved steadily as Mike checked his phone, scrolling through email notifications about the Henderson case he'd be presenting later that morning. Being prepared was second nature to him now, a habit formed through years of having to work twice as hard to get half as far. But those days had made him stronger, smarter, more resilient. "Morning, Mike," called out Jenny from behind the counter. She'd been working the morning shift for as long as he'd been coming here. "The usual?" Her bright smile was as much a part of his morning routine as the coffee itself. "You know it," he replied, already pulling up his mobile ordering app. "Got a big presentation today. Could use the extra boost." The app chimed as his order went through. Americano with an extra shot, his daily fuel for facing whatever challenges lay ahead. As he stepped aside to wait for his order, Mike noticed an older woman standing near the pickup counter. She wore expensive clothes, a crisp white blouse, designer slacks, and a pearl necklace that probably cost more than his first car. But it was her expression that caught his attention. Her eyes kept darting between him and the mobile order pickup area, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Mike had seen that look before, in elevator rides where people clutched their bags closer, in high-end stores where salespeople followed him a little too closely, in restaurants where hosts assumed he was delivering food rather than dining. He'd learned to let it roll off his back, focusing instead on proving people wrong through his actions rather than his words. The woman, who he would later learn was Patricia Wells from River City Realty, shifted her weight from foot to foot, checking her watch every few seconds as if time itself was personally inconveniencing her. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against her designer handbag, creating a rhythm of impatience that seemed to grow louder with each passing moment. Mike pulled out his phone again, this time opening the presentation he'd been refining all week. The Henderson case was complicated, a corporate merger gone wrong, with millions of dollars at stake. But he'd spent countless hours preparing, analyzing every detail, anticipating every possible question. His mom's voice echoed in his head. Excellence is the best answer to doubt. Around him, the coffee shop hummed with its usual morning energy. A group of college students huddled over textbooks in the corner, cramming for what looked like a physics exam. 2 elderly men played chess at their regular table, their game barely touched as they debated local politics. A young mother tried to wrangle 2 energetic toddlers while balancing a tray of muffins. This was why Mike loved River Street Coffee. It wasn't just about the excellent Americano or the convenient location. It was about being part of this daily tapestry of city life, where people from all walks of life came together, if only for a few minutes, united by their need for caffeine and connection. The barista called out another name, and Patricia's frown deepened. She glanced at Mike again, this time not bothering to hide her suspicion. Her body language screamed discomfort, as if his mere presence in this upscale coffee shop somehow violated an unwritten rule. Mike chose to focus on the warm sunlight streaming through the windows instead, highlighting the specks of dust dancing in the air. He thought about his presentation, about the trust his firm had placed in him, about how far he'd come from the days when his parents worried if they could afford his law school application fees. "Mobile order for Mike," called out the barista, setting a steaming cup on the counter, and that's when everything changed. As Mike reached for his coffee, Patricia stepped forward, her pearl necklace catching the morning light. The peaceful routine of River Street Coffee was about to be shattered, and none of them could have predicted what would happen next. Everything happened so fast that the other customers barely had time to react. As Mike's fingers wrapped around his coffee cup, Patricia's voice cut through the morning buzz like a knife. "That's my drink," she snapped, loud enough to make the chess players pause their game. "I've been waiting here for 15 minutes." The sudden accusation hung in the air, heavy as storm clouds. Mike's hand froze mid-reach, his mind quickly shifting into the same calm mode he used when handling difficult clients. He'd been in situations like this before, not exactly like this, but close enough to know that keeping cool was crucial. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and professional, "this is my mobile order. I can show you the receipt on my phone." He reached for his phone with his free hand, the screen already displaying the order confirmation. The timestamp clearly showed he'd placed the order 7 minutes ago, a simple fact that should have ended the conversation right there. But Patricia wasn't interested in facts. Her face flushed red, matching her designer lipstick. "I don't care what your phone says," she huffed, her pearl necklace swaying with each angry gesture. "I ordered a large Americano with an extra shot, and that's clearly what that is." She pointed at the cup as if it somehow proved her point. Jenny, the barista who'd known Mike for years, stepped forward. "Mrs. Wells, your order is still being prepared. It'll be ready in just a minute." She gestured toward the espresso machine where another barista was working on drinks, but Patricia acted like she hadn't heard a word. Instead, she reached for Mike's cup. "I'm not going to stand here and let you take my coffee." Her manicured fingers grabbed at the cup just as Mike lifted it, causing hot coffee to splash over the rim. Dark brown stains spread across his navy suit jacket like watercolors on paper. The coffee shop fell silent. Even the toddlers who had been giggling in the corner seemed to sense the tension. Mike looked down at his ruined jacket, the one his mother had saved up for months to buy him. He could almost hear her voice, "Always look your best, son. In this world, appearance matters more than it should." "Look what you made me do." Patricia's voice had risen to a shrill pitch. A few customers had their phones out now, recording the scene. She either didn't notice or didn't care. "This is ridiculous. I want to speak to the manager right now." Mr. Thompson, the store manager, was already making his way over from the back office. He was a tall man with kind eyes and gray temples who had run River Street Coffee for over a decade. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though the look on his face suggested he'd seen enough through the security cameras to know exactly what was happening. "This man is trying to steal my coffee," Patricia declared, drawing herself up to her full height, which still left her a head shorter than Mike. "I've been a loyal customer here for years, and I've never been treated so poorly." Mike remained silent for a moment, calculating his next words carefully. The lawyer in him knew how important it was to have witnesses, to establish facts, to maintain composure. The human in him felt the familiar weight of prejudice pressing down on his shoulders. "Mrs. Wells," he finally said, his voice calm but firm, "I have the receipt for this order. The barista has confirmed it's mine. You've ruined my suit jacket, and now you're making false accusations. I think we both know what's really happening here." The college students in the corner had stopped pretending to study. The chess players had abandoned their game entirely. Everyone in River Street Coffee was watching the scene unfold, understanding the underlying current of bias that ran beneath the surface of this misunderstanding about coffee. A young woman in scrubs, probably heading home from a night shift at the nearby hospital, stepped forward. "I saw the whole thing," she said. "He ordered his coffee on his phone. I was standing right behind him in line." Others began to nod, murmuring in agreement. But Patricia wasn't backing down. Her hand clutched her designer handbag like a shield, her knuckles white with tension. The situation had spiraled far beyond a simple mix-up about coffee orders, and everyone knew it. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight on a stage where a much larger drama about prejudice and privilege was playing out. The air in the coffee shop grew thicker with tension. Mike could feel his heartbeat in his ears, but his face remained composed. Years of facing similar situations had taught him that what happened next would matter not just for him, but for everyone watching. The next few moments would either escalate into something ugly or become an opportunity for something different. What nobody in River Street Coffee knew was that this was only the beginning. Patricia's next action would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed, turning this coffee shop confrontation into something that would make headlines and spark conversations across the city. But for now, time seemed suspended in that moment, like the specks of dust floating in the sunbeams, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. The morning sun continued to shine through River Street Coffee's windows, but the warmth had gone out of the room. Patricia's face twisted with an ugly expression that had nothing to do with coffee. "You people are always causing trouble," she spat out, her words dripping with years of unexamined prejudice. "Always playing the victim when you don't get your way." The coffee shop collectively caught its breath. Several phones were recording now, their small red lights blinking like silent witnesses. Mike felt a familiar heaviness in his chest, the weight of having to navigate moments like these carefully, knowing his response would be judged not just as his own, but as representative of many. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice level despite the coffee still dripping from his ruined suit jacket, "I think you should take a moment to think about what you're saying and doing right now." His law training kicked in automatically. Always stay calm, always create witnesses, always give the other party a chance to step back from the edge. But Patricia was past listening. Perhaps it was the embarrassment of being wrong about the coffee order, or maybe it was the way other customers were openly staring at her with disapproval. Whatever the reason, she chose to double down instead of backing off. "Don't you dare tell me what to do." She stepped closer, jabbing her finger toward Mike's chest. "I've worked in real estate for 20 years. I know how you people try to take over nice neighborhoods, nice businesses." Her voice rose with each word, her pearl necklace bouncing against her neck. Mr. Thompson, the store manager, tried to intervene. "Mrs. Wells, that's enough. You need to leave the premises now." His normally friendly face had hardened into something more serious. Jenny, the barista, was already reaching for the phone, ready to call security. That's when Patricia did something that would change everything. In a move that shocked everyone in the coffee shop, she reached out and shoved Mike hard, her manicured hands pushing against his chest. "Don't ignore me when I'm talking to you." Mike, who hadn't expected the physical assault, took a step back to steady himself. His coffee cup, already half empty from the earlier spill, clattered to the floor. The remaining liquid spread across the tiles like a dark mirror, reflecting the overhead lights. Years of morning basketball at the community center had given Mike good reflexes. When Patricia swung at him again, her designer bracelet glinting in the sunlight, he simply raised his arm in a defensive motion. He didn't push back or strike out, he just blocked her attempt to hit him. The force of her own aggressive movement, met with Mike's solid defense, sent Patricia stumbling backward. She caught herself against a table, knocking over an empty chair. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the now silent coffee shop. "Did everyone see that?" she shrieked, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "He attacked me. Someone call the police." Her voice cracked with hysteria, but the look in her eyes showed something else, surprise, maybe even fear, that the person she'd been attacking hadn't simply taken it. The young nurse in scrubs spoke up again, her phone still recording. "We all saw what happened. You attacked him twice. He only defended himself." Others nodded in agreement, their faces showing a mix of disgust and determination. The college students had stood up from their table, forming a subtle barrier between Patricia and Mike. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his tablet in hand. "Our security cameras caught everything, Mrs. Wells. I've already sent the footage to our corporate office and our legal team." His voice was firm but professional. "The police are on their way, but they're going to see exactly what we all saw." Mike straightened his tie, a habit from countless courtroom appearances. His mother's voice echoed in his head again. "Stand tall, son. Your dignity is not determined by their hatred." He looked around the coffee shop, noting the supportive faces of the other customers, the way they had instinctively moved to protect him. The sound of distant sirens grew closer. Patricia's face had lost its angry flush, replaced by a growing pallor as reality began to sink in. The phones were still recording, documenting every moment of her transformation from aggressive attacker to someone claiming victimhood. But the evidence was too clear, the witnesses too many. One of the elderly chess players, who had watched the whole scene unfold, slowly stood up. His voice was shaky but clear. "I've been coming here for 15 years, seen all kinds of people come through those doors. Never seen anything like this. Never wanted to see anything like this." He turned to Mike. "Son, you handled that with more grace than most could manage." The morning sun had climbed higher now, its rays highlighting the spilled coffee on the floor, the knocked-over chair, the small crowd of witnesses with their phones still raised. But it also illuminated something else, the way a community had instantly formed to stand against injustice, the way truth had found its voice in the face of prejudice. The police sirens were getting louder now, but this story was far from over. What happened in River Street Coffee that morning would ripple out far beyond its walls, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways none of them could yet imagine. And it all started with a simple cup of coffee and a choice about who we become when faced with the ugly reality of prejudice. The police arrived at River Street Coffee with their red and blue lights painting the morning scene in alternating colors. 2 officers walked in, taking in the knocked-over chair, the spilled coffee, and the crowd of customers still holding up their phones. The morning sun had fully risen now, streaming through the windows and illuminating the tension that hung in the air like dust motes. Patricia's demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the aggressive woman who had been shouting moments before. In her place stood someone trying desperately to look like a victim, dabbing at her eyes with a designer handkerchief. "Officers," she said, her voice trembling, "I'd like to press charges. I was assaulted." The younger officer, Officer Chen, no relation to Mike, pulled out his notepad while his partner, Officer Rodriguez, began asking the witnesses to lower their phones. But the customers weren't having it. The young nurse spoke up first, still in her scrubs from the night shift. "We're keeping our phones out. We all saw what really happened here." Mr. Thompson stepped forward with his tablet. "Officers, I have the entire incident on our security cameras. Would you like to see the footage?" His voice was steady, professional, leaving no room for doubt about what it would show. Mike stood quietly, his ruined suit acted a silent testimony to how the morning had unfolded. He'd been in enough courtrooms to know that evidence and witnesses were everything. Around him, the coffee shop had transformed into something between a crime scene and a community gathering. The college students, the chess players, the young mother with her toddlers, they had all become unexpected allies in this moment. Officer Rodriguez watched the security footage carefully, his expression unchanging but his eyes taking in every detail. The video was crystal clear. Patricia's accusation about the coffee, the initial splash that ruined Mike's jacket, her racial slurs, and finally, her physical attacks and Mike's measured response. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said, turning to Patricia, "the video shows you assaulting this gentleman twice. He only raised his arm in self-defense. His tone was professional but firm. Would you like to revise your statement?" Patricia's face crumpled, but not with genuine remorse. It was the face of someone realizing they had badly miscalculated. I felt threatened," she tried, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The other customers made sounds of disbelief. The elderly chess player who had spoken earlier shuffled forward, leaning on his cane. "Officers, I've been coming here every morning for 15 years. That young man," he pointed to Mike, "comes in every day, always polite, always professional. Today, he showed more patience than most people would have." Jenny, the barista, had been busy printing out receipts. She handed them to Officer Chen. "Here's the mobile order receipt showing Mr. Chen ordered his coffee at 8:43 a.m. Mrs. Wells didn't place her order until 8:47 a.m. Her coffee was still being prepared when this happened." The young mother who had been trying to keep her toddlers quiet spoke up, her voice clear and determined. "My kids saw everything. They saw an adult throw a tantrum and try to hurt someone because of the color of his skin. What am I supposed to tell them about that?" Officer Chen was taking statements from witnesses while Officer Rodriguez continued reviewing the footage. The atmosphere in the coffee shop had shifted from tension to something else, a sense of community standing together against injustice. Mike finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Officers, I'd like to press charges for assault and battery." He paused, straightening his tie again. "I'm an attorney with Thompson and Associates. I understand the legal process, and I believe it's important that actions have consequences." Patricia's face went pale. Her perfectly manicured hands clutched her designer handbag like a lifeline. "You don't understand," she started, but Mr. Thompson cut her off. "Mrs. Wells, you're banned from all River Street Coffee locations, effective immediately. Our company has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior and violence." He turned to the officers. We'll provide copies of all security footage and witness statements to support any legal proceedings. The morning light continued to stream through the windows as the officers began taking formal statements. Regular customers trickled in, looking confused at the scene before them. Jenny started making fresh coffee for everyone who had stayed to give statements, refusing payment with a small smile. Outside, the city was waking up properly now, unaware that in this little coffee shop, something significant had just happened. It wasn't just about a ruined suit jacket or a misplaced coffee order. It was about people choosing to stand up, to speak out, to say collectively that hate and prejudice wouldn't be tolerated in their community. As Mike gave his statement to Officer Chen, he thought about how this would affect his court presentation later. His suit was ruined, but somehow that seemed less important now. His mother had always told him that clothes don't make the man, actions do. Today, his actions, and those of everyone in River Street Coffee, spoke volumes about who they were and what they stood for. The scene would soon hit social media, becoming another viral moment in America's ongoing conversation about racism and accountability. But for now, in this coffee shop, it was simply about people coming together to do the right thing, one cup of coffee at a time. By afternoon, the morning's events at River Street Coffee had spread across social media like wildfire. Someone had uploaded a compilation of videos showing different angles of the incident, and it had already reached hundreds of thousands of views. The local news stations were running the security camera footage on repeat, their anchors discussing the broader implications of what had happened. Mike sat in his office at Thompson & Associates, his ruined suit jacket hanging on the back of his chair. He'd managed to borrow a jacket from a colleague for his court presentation, which he'd somehow gotten through despite the morning's chaos. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications, messages from friends who'd seen the videos, reporters seeking comments, and surprisingly, supporters from around the country. "You're trending on Twitter," said his colleague Tom, poking his head into Mike's office. "They're calling you coffee shop lawyer. You're basically a hero for how you handled it." Tom paused, then added more seriously, "The senior partners want to see you, by the way. They're in the main conference room." Mike's stomach tightened as he walked down the hallway. He'd been at the firm for 5 years, working his way up from junior associate to his current position. Would they see this incident as bad publicity? His shoes clicked against the polished floor as he approached the conference room, each step echoing with uncertainty. But when he opened the door, he found all 5 senior partners standing there with expressions of concern, not for the firm's reputation, but for him. Mrs. Johnson, the managing partner, spoke first. "Mike, we've seen the footage. The firm stands behind you 100%. In fact, we'd like to take this opportunity to do something meaningful." What happened next would change not just Mike's career, but the way local businesses approached issues of discrimination. The firm decided to launch a pro bono initiative specifically focused on representing victims of racial discrimination in public spaces. They wanted Mike to lead it. Meanwhile, across town, Patricia was facing her own consequences. Her real estate office had placed her on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation. The video had reached their corporate headquarters, and they were scrambling to distance themselves from her actions. Her face was all over the local news, and her carefully built reputation in the real estate world was crumbling. The police investigation moved forward quickly, aided by the abundance of video evidence and witness statements. The district attorney's office decided to pursue charges of assault and battery with a hate crime enhancement. They reached out to Mike, asking if he would be willing to make a statement about the impact of such incidents on the community. Back at River Street Coffee, something unexpected was happening. The shop had become a symbol of standing up against discrimination. People were coming from all over the city to buy coffee there, many leaving generous tips for Jenny and the other staff who had handled the situation so well. Mr. Thompson had put up a small sign that read, "All are welcome here," in the window, and it had quickly become a popular photo spot. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the incident, but they focused on something different, the way the community had come together. They interviewed the elderly chess player who had spoken up, the young nurse who had recorded everything, and the mother who had witnessed it with her children. Each of them spoke about why they chose to get involved rather than stay silent. "I couldn't just watch," the nurse had said in her interview. "We see too many people looking away when these things happen. That day, we all decided to look straight at it and say, 'Not here, not anymore.'" The The story caught the attention of civil rights organizations. They reached out to Mike, asking him to speak at their events about how to respond effectively to discrimination. His measured response, defending himself while staying within the law, had provided a powerful example of standing up to racism without escalating to violence. At the courthouse, Patricia's arraignment drew a crowd. She arrived wearing sunglasses and a dark blazer, trying to hide from the cameras. Her lawyer had advised her to take a plea deal, which included mandatory anti-bias training and community service. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and fighting the charges would only make things worse. The judge, an older woman with stern eyes and reading glasses perched on her nose, looked at Patricia over the rim of her glasses. "Mrs. Wells, your actions that day showed a disturbing disregard for human dignity. This court takes hate crimes very seriously." Mike had chosen to attend the arraignment, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. He wasn't there to gloat or seek revenge. He was there because he believed in the power of accountability to create change. His mother had always taught him that how you respond to hatred matters more than the hatred itself. The case became a talking point in local government meetings. City council members proposed new training requirements for business owners about handling discriminatory incidents. River Street Coffee's response was held up as a model, how their clear policies, security cameras, and staff training had helped ensure justice was served. Legal commentators on TV discussed the case, noting how the combination of video evidence, witness participation, and professional security measures had created an airtight case. "This is how we make change," one analyst said, "not through violence, but through community action and legal consequences." Mike's law firm started receiving calls from other businesses wanting to review their anti-discrimination policies. The incident had sparked a citywide conversation about responsibility, not just of individuals who commit discriminatory acts, but of businesses and bystanders who have the power to stand against them. As the legal proceedings continued, Mike found himself thinking about his parents, who had taught him to maintain his dignity no matter what. They had always said that change happens one person at a time, one moment at a time. That morning in the coffee shop had proved them right. Sometimes all it takes is one incident, handled the right way, to start making a difference. 3 weeks after the incident, River Street Coffee hosted its first community dialogue session. The shop had closed early for the event, and every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, cups of complimentary coffee in hand, as Mike took his place at the front of the room. The same sunlight that had illuminated that tense morning now fell softly on a community coming together to create change. "I never wanted to be at the center of a viral video," Mike began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed coffee shop. "But since it happened, I believe we have a responsibility to turn this incident into something meaningful." The crowd nodded, many of them regulars who had been there that morning. Among the attendees was Officer Rodriguez, who had responded to the incident. He wasn't there in an official capacity. He'd come on his own time, still in his civilian clothes after his shift. "What happened here got us talking at the precinct," he shared. "We're revising our training protocols for handling bias incidents. Sometimes it takes seeing something up close to realize we can do better." The young mother who had witnessed everything with her kids was there too. She brought a drawing her 6-year-old had made, a picture of people of different colors holding hands in front of what was clearly meant to be River Street Coffee. Mr. Thompson had proudly hung it behind the counter. "My kids ask questions now," she told the group, her voice emotional but clear. They notice when people are treated differently. But instead of just being confused or scared, they know that standing up for what's right is something everyone can do. Several parents in the audience nodded in understanding. The local business association had sent representatives. They were taking notes as Mr. Thompson explained how his staff training and security measures had helped handle the situation. "It's not enough to just say everyone's welcome," he explained. "You have to back that up with policies and preparation." Jenny, the barista who had stood her ground that morning, shared her perspective. "We've always had regular customers of all backgrounds, but now there's something different. People aren't just coming for coffee. They're coming because they know this is a place that stands for something." The elderly chess player who had spoken up during the incident had become something of a local celebrity. His words to the police had been quoted in several news articles. "Been playing chess here for 15 years, he told the crowd. "Chess teaches you that every move has consequences." That morning, we all chose to make the right move. Mike's law firm had set up a small table at the back, providing free legal information about rights and responsibilities in public spaces. They'd created simple, clear handouts explaining what to do if you witness or experience discrimination. The stack of papers kept needing to be replenished as people eagerly took copies to share. A local civil rights activist stood up to speak, her gray hair gleaming in the evening light. "What makes this case different is how the community responded," she said. "Nobody turned away. Nobody pretended it wasn't happening. That's how real change begins." The conversation flowed naturally from discrimination to community building. People shared their own experiences, but also their ideas for making spaces more inclusive. A business owner from across the street announced he was installing better security cameras. A teacher talked about using the incident as a teaching moment in her social studies class. Mr. Thompson shared the coffee shop's new initiatives. They were starting a monthly coffee and conversation series where people could discuss difficult topics in a safe space. They'd also created a scholarship fund for barista training, specifically focused on creating opportunities for underrepresented groups in the coffee industry. As the evening continued, something remarkable happened. People who had been strangers 3 weeks ago were exchanging phone numbers, making plans for community projects, forming connections that went beyond that one incident. The coffee shop had transformed from a place where hate had surfaced to a space where healing was happening. A local artist had created a mural on one wall of the coffee shop showing diverse hands holding coffee cups. Below it, in elegant letters, were the words that had become the shop's unofficial motto: "Strength in every cup, unity in every sip." The college students who had witnessed the incident had started a social media campaign called #CoffeeShopHeroes, highlighting everyday people standing up against discrimination. Their posts featured not just Mike, but all the witnesses who had spoken up, creating a powerful message about community responsibility. Near the end of the evening, a surprise guest arrived, the district attorney herself. She hadn't come to talk about the case against Patricia, but rather to announce a new task force focusing on preventing and responding to bias incidents in public spaces. She wanted community members to be part of it. "What happened here shows us two things," she said, looking around the room. "First, that these incidents are still happening in our city. But second, and more importantly, that we have the power as a community to stand against them effectively." As the meeting wound down, people lingered, reluctant to leave the sense of purpose and connection that had filled the space. Mike looked around at the faces, some familiar from that morning, others new but equally committed to making change. His mother's words came back to him again: "Change happens one person at a time, one cup of coffee at a time." Outside, the city lights were coming on, and through the windows of River Street Coffee, anyone passing by could see what real community looked like. People of all backgrounds coming together, not just to talk about change, but to make it happen, one conversation at a time. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at River Street Coffee. The leaves had changed and fallen, and winter was giving way to early spring. The coffee shop had become more than just a local business. It was now a symbol of how one community had chosen to face discrimination head-on and create lasting change. On this particular morning, Mike walked into the shop wearing a new navy suit, different from the one that had been ruined, but chosen with the same care his mother always taught him to show. The bell chimed just as it had that day, but everything else had changed. The first thing visitors noticed now was the wall of photos near the entrance, snapshots of community events, news clippings, and letters of support from around the country. At the center was the children's drawing of people holding hands, now professionally framed. Below it sat a plaque that read, "Every person who walks through these doors is part of our story." Jenny called out her usual greeting from behind the counter, but now she was the head trainer for the shop's new barista program. The program, funded by local businesses and Mike's law firm, had already helped 20 people from underserved communities start careers in the coffee industry. The elderly chess players were at their usual table, but now they had company. A group of high school students had started joining them during study breaks, learning not just chess moves but life lessons from men who had seen the city change over decades. "Check," one teenager said proudly as his opponent, the same man who had spoken up that day, nodded with approval. Patricia's story had taken an unexpected turn. After completing her mandated anti-bias training, she had done something surprising. She'd asked to speak at one of the coffee shop's community forums. When she stood up to talk, her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. "I've had to face some hard truths about myself," she had told the packed room. "I lost my job, my reputation, and nearly my freedom because of beliefs I never even questioned. The hardest part wasn't the legal consequences, it was realizing how wrong I'd been for so long." Her words weren't met with applause, but with thoughtful nods of acknowledgement. Real change, they had all learned, starts with honest reflection. The district attorney's task force had turned into a permanent committee, with Mike serving as one of its advisors. They'd already helped draft new guidelines for businesses dealing with discrimination incidents, using River Street Coffee's response as a model. Other cities had started reaching out, asking for help implementing similar programs. Mr. Thompson had been invited to speak at national conferences about creating inclusive spaces in the food service industry. "It's not about having the right words on your wall," he would tell audiences. "It's about backing those words up with action when it matters most." The Young Mother's Kids had started a trend at their elementary school. Students were creating friendship bracelets in different colors, symbolizing unity in diversity. The school had embraced the idea, turning it into a larger discussion about acceptance and standing up for others. Mike's law firm had handled 30 pro bono cases related to public discrimination in the past 6 months. Each case helped establish stronger precedents for holding people accountable for their actions. But more importantly, each case showed other victims that they didn't have to face these situations alone. The local news had done a follow-up story, focusing not on the viral incident, but on what had grown from it. They interviewed Officer Rodriguez, who now led bias response training sessions for new recruits. "We're teaching officers that it's not just about responding to incidents," he explained. "It's about being part of the solution." River Street Coffee's Coffee and Conversation sessions had become so popular, they had to start using the community center next door to fit everyone. People from all walks of life would gather to discuss challenging topics over cups of coffee, finding common ground in their shared humanity. The college students' #CoffeeShopHeroes campaign had evolved into a non-profit organization, helping small businesses implement anti-discrimination policies and training. They'd created a certification program, and businesses proudly displayed their safe space stickers in their windows. On this morning, Mike sat at his usual table, watching the sunrise through the windows just as he had that day 6 months ago. A new family walked in, looking around uncertainly until they saw the wall of photos and the welcoming smiles. The father relaxed visibly, leading his children to the counter where Jenny greeted them warmly. The shop's tip jar had a new label, "Every cup makes a difference." It wasn't just about coffee anymore, it was about the countless small moments of connection that happened over those cups, the conversations that changed minds, the courage that inspired others to speak up. As Mike sipped his Americano, he thought about how his mother had been right. Change really did happen one person at a time, one moment at a time. The incident that could have left him bitter had instead opened doors for real transformation, not just in one coffee shop, but in an entire community. Outside, the city was waking up to another day, and through the windows of River Street Coffee, the morning sun illuminated what progress looked like, not a perfect world, but one where people were willing to learn, to grow, and to stand together for what was right. The bell above the door chimed again as more customers walked in, each one adding their own chapter to a story that was still being written, one cup of coffee at a time. On this morning, Mike sat at his usual table, watching the sunrise through the windows just as he had that day 6 months ago. A new family walked in, looking around uncertainly until they saw the wall of photos and the welcoming smiles. The father relaxed visibly, leading his children to the counter where Jenny greeted them warmly. The shop's tip jar had a new label, "Every cup makes a difference." It wasn't just about coffee anymore, it was about the countless small moments of connection that happened over those cups, the conversations that changed minds, the courage that inspired others to speak up. As Mike sipped his Americano, he thought about how his mother had been right. Change really did happen one person at a time, one moment at a time. The incident that could have left him bitter had instead opened doors for real transformation, not just in one coffee shop, but in an entire community. Outside, the city was waking up to another day, and through the windows of River Street Coffee, the morning sun illuminated what progress looked like, not a perfect world, but one where people were willing to learn, to grow, and to stand together for what was right. The bell above the door chimed again as more customers walked in, each one adding their own chapter to a story that was still being written, one cup of coffee at a time.